Are there examples in the communities that you see, like the more successful Ethereum communities around the world? What do you think are their what are the aspects that make them successful?
I think having regular meetups is definitely helpful, and so that it's something like monthly, so people can and fairly reliable and always interesting, so people know that they can come and there will be something new that they can learn. Also, just having a critical mass and having enough people and different kinds of people, and also I think it's important to have at least some people who are working on some kind of interesting projects. So in the community, things are actually happening, and it's not just people who are learning and reading about blockchains. The successful communities that I tend to see, so like Toronto tends to be fairly successful. I would say Silicon Valley tends to be fairly active, and London is very active, and so all of those places do tend to have just people who are dedicated to continuing to making sure that the community continues to exist and things continue to keep happening. So that's one side. The other side is just having projects.
Okay, thank you. In a year from now, we would love to be one of the examples of successful community in the world. Thank you.
So just a few more things, actually. I'm curious about the audience again. I want to ask who here considers themselves or is actively investing in the technology. And that could mean anything. That means either you're investing in tokens or you're investing in companies or something like this. Yeah, okay? Great, because for those of you who don't know me, I'm an investor myself. So I run a venture capital fund along with my partner Stefan. And so I'm very interested in this idea too. And I do think the idea of investing is also part of a healthy community. But what I would want to discourage, because it's a really poor way of investing, is speculation. And I think that what I would suggest to all of you is by getting involved in the community, you can become expert and you can become masterful at understanding the technology and understanding the opportunities. So for those of you who are really interested in investing, I would first suggest that you become part of the community to learn, because ultimately that will make you a much better investor.
In top 2 rules of investing, number 1, do not throw money into something you do not understand. And number 2, do not invest more than you can afford to lose.
所以我们建立起一个开放的平台，所以以后希望大家有多一些机会都参与一些。
If you want to ask questions, 如果你想说中文，你也可以。Если есть кто-то, кто говорит по-русски, можете по-русски говорить.
First question.
Please say your name first.
All right. My name is Tom Zhao. My oral English is not very good, so may I ask you some questions in Chinese?
Okay.
大家好，我们是我是秘密数字有限公司的 CEO， 然后我们可能有一款产品，在座的在座的朋友们可能知道，每日必读啊，然后是这样的，我有三个问题，可以吗 ？Three questions. Only one, right? Only one. Okay. If only one question, I will ask you like this.
Most important one. 最重要。
Okay. 是这样的，就是您怎么解决之前像 status 那样的transaction jam 那样的情况 ？And then 关于 EOS， 您刚才说它是中心化的，我是第一次听说这样的一个说法，所以我想请您解释一下。Thank you.
我先回答一个 status 的问题。这个 status 的ICO 的问题有2个解决方案。第一个就是我们需要提高区块链的扩展性。就是 status 的问题就是现在以太坊的网络只能处理 每秒可能5个交易。
Yeah.
所以如果有一个 ICO， 这个 ICO 有10万个交易，那需要2万秒。
OK。
2万秒就是7个小时。
Yeah.
所以如果我们可以10倍、100倍提高区块链的扩展性
OK。
可以多交易。第二个问题就是EOS 相关的。
Yeah.
这个有如果有人说他在做自己的区块链，然后他说他的区块链很厉害，他的扩展性比以太坊的扩展性高。你要问为什么？就是如果他的区块链可以处理很多的交易，我们的区块链可以处理5个交易每秒，那他的区块链为什么没有我们区块链的限制
？Sorry.
就是 the Ethereum can process 5 transactions per second.
Yeah.
If EOS says that they can process more,
Yeah.
why? So what is the difference that makes this happen?
No, you justified the EOS is
Yes.
This.
Centralized.
Yes.
Centralized,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. So I can. So
Why?
Why? Okay. So the reason why EOS says that they can process more transactions comes from 2 sources, right? So one of them is that there's a lot of protocol features that Ethereum has that EOS doesn't have. So one of them, for example, is Merkle trees. So this is 这是一个比较复杂的技术话题，但是我们的以太坊的链有一个 Merkle tree 的概念，就是 if you want to prove anything about some transaction, then anyone in the network can prove it, and they actually do not need that much computing power in order to prove that the state of some account is some number, that some transaction was included.
Okay.
EOS does not have this.
Okay.
Right? So what that means is that if you are participating in the EOS network and you do not have a full node, so you do not have a node that is processing all of the transactions, then that means that you have to trust the full nodes. That there's no way to verify for yourself that everything is happening correctly. The second thing is that EOS, the number of full nodes in EOS is going to be much smaller, right? So Dan Larimer has this concept called DPoS, a delegated proof of stake, where he says that in DPoS you only need about 100 nodes in the network, and consensus happens between these 100 nodes, and with these, and everyone else is a thin client, right? So everyone else has to trust these 100 nodes. And
They can vote for it.
yeah, they can vote, right? So the idea is that, and the other reason why it claims it can process more transactions is because it only has 100 nodes. The requirements, the kind of computing, storage, bandwidth requirements for each of these 100 nodes are much higher, right? So this is where scalability. This is one way to achieve scalability. The problem is that if you have 100 nodes, then the system is much more centralized. The system can't, and if it's 100 nodes, then first of all, you can denial of service attack them. Because people have to vote for them, the nodes that win are going to be the nodes that everybody knows, and so it's easier to attack the people running the nodes. They can get shut, ISPs can shut them down, companies can shut it down, governments can shut them down fairly easily.
Okay.
So it's, so basically, like that particular path to scalability does come at a fairly high cost, right? And the cost is that if you try to achieve scalability by having larger nodes, then the number of nodes becomes much smaller, and that makes the system more centralized.
Okay.
And so this is also there are many other platforms right now that try to say that they have kind of higher scalability in this way, right? That they just say, we just set the limits higher and just try to process many more transactions on one node. And these systems all tend to have the same kinds of costs.
我再反馈一下可以吗？
Okay.
因为非常抱歉，这个我的英语真的不是很好，所以我只能片面的听到您的一些回答。然后呢，但是我想 其实我想表达的是 ，ETH 在某种意义上也是一个中心化的。You are the decentralized.
I am decentralized.
Yeah.
No, but
Yeah. You are the centralized. Sorry. You are the centralized.
I would no. I
You
would
can change the ETC to ETH.
So ETC
Right.
still exists, right? And so if you disagree, if you don't like ETH, you can switch to ETC.
但是另一方面，我又想说，因为去中心化只是一个远景的目标，
Yes.
它并不是一个绝对化。 我们在中心化到去中心化之间是渐进的，绝不是一个跳跃式的。
Of course.
对，然后那个，所以某种意义上，像您那样中心化的存在是现在是必要的。
Yeah.
对，然后这也是我想表达的。
Of course. So,
Okay,
although I would
that's
say,
good.
so I would say that like in the long term, right? So maintaining like we expect Ethereum is going to become more decentralized over time as the community grows, and it has grown quite a lot, quite a bit over the last 2 years. And so, like in the long term, you need to have some path for like when the system becomes more well developed and more stable. You do need to have some path for how it can continue to survive without kind of one person or a small group of people controlling it. And there are different kinds of decentralization. So, for example, like there's development, there's technical, there's technology, and I would say there definitely is a balance. Though I would say that I would say that there is room for platforms that are kind of more centralized, and there are things like consortium chains, and I would say there's also quite a lot of room for fully decentralized systems as well. So like I do expect that we are going to see a spectrum of everything going from systems like Bitcoin and Ethereum all the way up to like basically the same thing that runs like stock exchanges today, right? So like they might find a niche, but like I personally do not think it's the same niche.
Thank you.
Does not depend on any one particular company in order to maintain it, and where your use of this identity is not limited to kind of that one company's ecosystem. So you can use blockchains for this. So you can use blockchains in order to register names, in order to potentially register websites, in order to register anything where you a number of users. So there's already something like somewhere over 100,000 people, or at least 100,000 registrations on ENS somehow, which is the Ethereum name system, have already taken place. This is another kind of test project. So this one is by the United Nations, and like a lot of these large government and large business and institutional applications still tends to be very early stage, but so what we have over here is this is the United Nations Food Program, and in this kind of initial test, they were using the Ethereum blockchain in order to keep track of remittances that they were sending to people in the Middle East so that they could buy food. So another simple application, but it could potentially provide a lot of value. So when people talk about blockchains, a lot of people talk about using them to create a very low-cost infrastructure to financially empower developing countries, to financially empower places that don't have infrastructure, to financially empower places that are where currently there are wars and so no one can build infrastructure. And here it's starting to happen. And there are many other applications. And here are just a few of those, a few of the categories. So the first category is prediction markets. So this is basically systems that you can use in order to make bets on events. So if he wants to make a bet that someone will win an election, that some company's stock price will go up, that in any event in the world will happen, you can even bet on the temperature. Then you can use applications like this to do it, and most of them are being built on Ethereum. DAOs. So DAOs are this very interesting concept that has only kind of really existed in people's thoughts for maybe the last several years. So DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And the idea is that you can think of a DAO as being like a smart contract, except the smart contract, it controls assets, it performs some service, and the contract is intended to exist for a very long time. And you can think of this smart contract as representing some organization and representing the rules by which people in this organization, by which people using some application or service interact with each other. So you can think of it as kind of like a digital company that only exists on the blockchain. And people are interested in using this in various applications. There are DAOs that are looking to do investment. There are DAOs looking to do charities. So there's many things that this can be used for. Financial applications, there's a few insurance projects, supply chain tracking, using records that are saved on a blockchain to keep track of products being created, products being shipped, payments. So there's people using blockchains and people using Ethereum to do very many different kinds of things. So I can talk a bit about some of where Ethereum's technology is currently going and some of our roadmap for where we expect the Ethereum protocol to be in the future. And I think that one of the slides that I use sometimes to kind of explain why I think technology is such a big part of the challenge is this, right? So if you look at the number of transactions per second, this is the number of operations every second that blockchains can process. So if you look at Ethereum, if you look at Bitcoin, most of it still tends to be fairly low, right? So right now, the amount of traffic that's going through the Bitcoin network is about 3 transactions a second. The amount of traffic going through the Ethereum network is also about 3 transactions a second. But if you want to get to the point where blockchains are being used for mainstream applications, then Uber, 12 transactions a second. PayPal, 200 per second. Visa, 2,000. DTCC, over 10,000. Alipay, 100,000. So if we want blockchains to be able to support large mainstream usage, then the technology has to improve in order to be able to handle all this load. So this is only one challenge, right? And actually, I think that there are several different challenges that we have to solve if we want blockchains in general to be used much more than they are now. So aside from scalability, another very major and important one is security. So the blockchain protocol itself needs to be secure. So the blockchain itself needs to be able to resist DOS attacks, 51% attacks, other kinds of attacks. Blockchains are completely open systems. Anyone can interact with a blockchain, anyone can participate in a blockchain. What this also means is that anyone can attack a blockchain. And if there is a way to attack a blockchain, then anyone in the world can do this very easily. And so the need for blockchain protocols to be secure is very important. Also, applications on top of blockchains need to be secure. So smart contracts written on top of blockchains need to not have bugs in their code. Needs to do what they say they're going to do. User interfaces need to be secure. The way that users interact with their applications need to be secure. The blockchain ecosystem needs to have some answer for what happens if I lose my private key. Scalability and also privacy. So with privacy, there are many kinds of applications where you do not need privacy. But there's also many applications where people want privacy. People do not want the entire world to know every single one of their payments. They do not want everyone in the world to know every single thing that's happening inside of their company, every single resolution that they're passing. And so we do need to find technologies to solve each of these problems. And we are working on solutions for each and every one of these. So here we talk about sharding, channels, side chains, off-chain protocols. zero knowledge proofs, ring signatures. I don't have time now to go into any of these in detail, although there are other meetups where I have talked about some of these separately. So for example, in Hong Kong, I did a meetup where I talked about zero knowledge proofs for about an hour. There are other places where I talk about scalability challenges. And if you want to kind of get into any of these topics much more deeply, then I would recommend that you look into this more online. So aside from these three things, well, as part of security, one of the major things that we are in the process of starting to do is transition the blockchain consensus algorithm from something called proof of work to something called proof of stake. So the idea here is that if you look at most large blockchains right now, in order for the blockchain to remain secure, it relies on this consensus algorithm. And this consensus algorithm is an algorithm that is run by many thousands of nodes that are all across the network. And the way proof of work works is it requires each and every one of these computers in the network to constantly run a large amount of computation and basically try to solve mathematical puzzles. And these mathematical puzzles do not have any value to themselves. The purpose of doing this computation and the purpose of solving these mathematical puzzles is basically to convince the network that you're not trying to attack it, kind of. And it's much more complex than that, but that's one simple way of thinking about it. But the problem is that this mechanism is extremely inefficient. And so if you look at Bitcoin, for example, it's burning something like $4 to $5 million per day of electricity and hardware costs. And Ethereum is also burning about $4 million a day of electricity and hardware costs. So we're, because we care about energy efficiency, we care about the environment, and I know China cares a lot about the environment too recently. We want to try to make the blockchain much more efficient, consume much less energy, and part of why we're doing this, part of what we're doing here is we are switching from proof of work, so from this kind of computationally intensive form of consensus to something that's called proof of stake. And the main difference between the two is that the way that a user participates in the network with proof of work is through running large amounts of computation. And in proof of stake, so with computation, you participate in the network by running a large amount of computation, and by doing so, proving that you have access to, that you control some assets in the real world. So when you solve mathematical puzzles, when you run this computation, you are proving that you control some very powerful computer. In proof of stake, instead of proving that you control a very powerful computer, you are proving that you control coins inside of the network. So instead of using physical assets, it uses digital assets that are inside of the system. And by doing this, by moving the consensus from being based on physical assets to being based on digital assets, we can remove most of the need for energy consumption. So the idea is that, so right now, if you want to participate in the network as a miner in Ethereum's proof of work system, you would need to buy a powerful computer, then connect this powerful computer to the network, and it would start running these computations, and in exchange, you would get some reward. With proof of stake, you would take money, you would use it to buy Ether, which is the cryptocurrency inside of Ethereum, and then this by itself will allow you to become a validator. So a participant of the network's consensus algorithm, a participant of the process by which the network agrees on which transactions to accept and which blocks to accept. So the transition to Casper proof of stake will happen in two stages, where the first stage goes from our current pure proof of work to an algorithm where we have kind of hybrid, where it's part proof of work and part proof of stake, and later on we'll move to full proof of stake. So the main purpose behind this is like two things. one of them is that we want to reduce the cost of the blockchain coming to consensus, and the other is we want to increase its security. So this is one of the things that we are researching. For scalability, as I mentioned, we do have several different research directions, and one of them is this strategy called sharding. And the idea behind sharding basically is that if you look at the way that all blockchains work today, you have a network, and this network contains a large number of computers, and every computer in this network has to process every transaction that's sent by any user in the entire system. So right now, Ethereum processes 3 transactions per second. This means that if you run a node, if you are part of the Ethereum network, then your computer is processing 3 transactions per second. If Ethereum's capacity goes up to 1,000 transactions per second, then every computer in the network would be processing 1,000 transactions per second. Most computers cannot process 1,000 transactions per second, and so there is a limit. So the idea behind sharding is we can create blockchains where instead of every computer in the network processing everything, every computer in the network processes only a small portion of all the transactions that exist. Some nodes process one part of transactions, some nodes process some other part of transactions, and so forth. So this way, the capacity of the entire network can be much higher than the capacity of any one single node. So we also are working on other strategies for scaling, including things like state channels. And if you want to learn more about that, I would also recommend that you research it on the internet. So security. So as I mentioned before, I think blockchains have 3 major kinds of security challenges. So one of them is the security of the protocol. And Casper's proof of stake is one way in which we are trying to improve this. Another thing is security of user interfaces. And a third thing is the security of smart contracts. So security of programs that exist on top, and applications that run on top of Ethereum. So the main problem here is that there have been several fairly high-profile cases where someone created a smart contract. So someone created a program, uploaded it onto Ethereum, and this program contained a large amount of money. But because the code in the program had a bug, so the code in the program had an error in it, a hacker was able to access the program and withdraw all of the money and steal the money for themselves. So this has happened several times now. So the first major incident was something called the DAO. There was one that happened more recently, which was the Parity wallet hack. And so this shows that this is one of the major problems that has to be resolved if we want to have secure smart contracts. So we're working on several different approaches to try to resolve this issue, and most of them have to do with improving the programming languages that people use in order to write contracts that go onto Ethereum. So if you look at this code, this smart contracts code that I just showed you 20 minutes ago. So what's happening here is that this is a programming language called Solidity, and currently most developers that write code for Ethereum write their code in Solidity. The code then gets compiled, and what gets uploaded onto Ethereum is something called EVM code. Now, theoretically, you do not have to write your applications in Solidity. If you want to use another programming language, you can use another programming language. And so, what our research team has been, and many other people have been working on, is first of all trying to see, can we improve Solidity? So can we make it so that programs written in Solidity are less likely to have errors, are more likely to do exactly what they say they do, and where it's not so easy to find bugs in programs written in the language. So we have this as part of our effort to improve Solidity. We have this kind of thing called the Underhanded Solidity Contest, and part of the goal here is that the idea behind this contest is that if you can write a program in Solidity that looks like it does one thing, but actually does another thing. So let's say that looks like it's a DAO, but actually lets you take all the money out. Then if you can write a program like this, then you win the contest and you get a prize. So the purpose of this is to try to work with the community and try to get a better understanding of what kinds of ways can people write code with accidental bugs or code that is deliberately misleading. And from there, try to use that in order to improve the programming language. Aside from Solidity, we also have one developer who is working on another programming language that's called Bamboo. And there's also a language called Viper. And this is one that I've been working on for the past 8 months or so. And so the goals of these programming languages in both cases is to try to make it more difficult to write code that is misleading. And also to make it easier to catch errors, to make it more difficult to write code that does have errors. So about 2 weeks ago, we had a workshop in Cornell University in the United States. And the Ethereum team, or many people in the Ethereum research team, worked with researchers and academics from Cornell and from other places. And we have actually collaborated on some solutions and some improvements to contract security, scalability, and various other challenges that we have. So the Ethereum Foundation, so the group that is currently paying most of the developers that are working on the Ethereum code, is actively working with universities, working with researchers, working with individuals to try to see if we can work together to solve some of these challenges, improve security, improve scalability, improve privacy in various different contexts. And from our work and from some of these collaborations, there already have been quite a lot of results, and we expect to see more results in the future. So if anyone here is interested in just learning more about Ethereum or trying to get into Ethereum as a developer, then I would recommend to start off, look at these two websites. So look at ethereum.org. And ethereum.org contains some tutorials, some kind of guides that you can follow in order to learn how to write a smart contract, how to upload it, how to build an application. The Ethereum wiki contains a lot of information, more technical information about how the Ethereum protocol works. And from there, you can also find a lot more resources. So if people here are interested in creating a startup that does something on top of Ethereum, then you are going to need developers. And developers, in general, I would say it's actually not that difficult for an existing programmer to become an Ethereum application developer. I mean, we have deliberately tried to make the experience of writing smart contracts feel very similar to writing existing programs. Now, if you want to become an Ethereum core protocol developer, so work on scalability and security challenges of the Ethereum protocol, then this is much harder because this is still a very new field, and the number of people that really understand all of the challenges involved is still very small, but it is also possible. And if anyone here wants to work with the Ethereum research team, then we are hiring too, and we are looking for volunteers too. Otherwise, I also definitely recommend looking at and working for any of these Ethereum projects. So I would say, in general, right, if there are many different sides to the Ethereum community, and there are people who are involved in Ethereum because they're interested in the technology. There are people who wants to build things on top of it. There are people who wants to do research around it to try to understand what kinds of things can be built on top of it. And so the blockchain space is, even after 9 years, I would say still young and still a rapidly growing space, and there are many different ways to participate. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.